My name is Alexander Hart, and at the time of this story I was 29 years old, newly relocated from Chicago to a rural town called Mercer Hollow, population 812. The official record will tell you that I arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September and signed the lease for a small rented farmhouse on the northern edge of town. But the record won't tell you why the people there stared at me the way they did, or why by nightfall I was seriously considering packing everything back into my truck and leaving. I didn't know then how quickly the unease would take root, or how fast a perfectly ordinary day could tilt into something I still struggle to explain without feeling my pulse climb. I got into town just after 9 a.m., driving down a two-lane road that wound through cornfields still tall enough to hide anything taller than a man. The sky was washed-out blue with a thin haze, the kind that makes distance look like a painting hung too far away. My GPS kept losing the signal, but I didn't need it by then. Mercer Hollow was small enough that once I hit the sign, every place I needed sat within the next 2 miles. The streets were tidy, the houses set far apart, their porches deep and shadowed, like the whole town had grown up around Sunday mornings and early bedtimes. I'd romanticized the move, thinking I'd exchange noise for quiet, crowds for open space, stress for air that didn't smell like hot metal and exhaust. And honestly, the first minutes didn't disappoint. Main Street looked like something out of an old photograph. A butcher shop, a hardware store, an antique store that probably hadn't changed its window display since the 90s, and a diner shaped like a chrome capsule. It was the people who felt wrong. Not all of them, just the ones who noticed me. When I parked outside the real estate office, an older man in suspenders and a sun-bleached cap was sweeping the stoop next door. The broom paused midair when I opened my truck door. He didn't nod, didn't smile, didn't even pretend to go back to work. He just stared at me with a kind of alertness that felt out of place in the slow rhythm of the morning. Across the street, a woman pushing a stroller stopped mid-step. She looked at me, then hurried in the opposite direction, back the way she'd come. I tried telling myself I was imagining it. New guy in a tiny town, of course people looked. That's all it was. I held onto that thought as I walked into the small brick building with a hanging Mercer Hollow Realty sign. The lease signing went smoothly. The agent, a thin woman named Marissa, had the brittle politeness of someone who knows how to sell property but not how to mask discomfort. She shook my hand, but her eyes flicked to the door twice during the conversation, like she expected someone else to walk in. When we finished, she handed me the keys. "You'll want to settle in before sunset," she said, light but clipped. "People turn in early around here." It felt like a suggestion wrapped in a warning, though I couldn't have explained why. The farmhouse sat on a dirt road outside town, framed by a decaying wooden fence and a yard that hadn't been tended in months. The house itself was charming enough. 2 stories, faded white siding, tall, narrow windows. Exactly the kind of place I'd pictured myself riding in. The previous tenant had left it furnished, which saved me the trouble of hauling in a sofa or bed. When I stepped onto the porch, I saw something off. The front door was already unlocked. I paused for a moment, fingers tightening around the key. Maybe the last tenant forgot to lock it. Maybe Marissa had come by earlier. Maybe the lock was just old. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of dust and citrus cleaner, the kind that lingers for hours after a quick wipe down. No signs of life, no footsteps, nothing moved or left out of place. I checked the rooms anyway: kitchen, living room, small study, then the upstairs bedroom and bathroom. Everything was empty. I told myself that was the end of it. By 11 a.m., I'd unloaded my boxes and started sorting them into piles. I didn't unpack much, just what I needed for the day. Coffee mug, laptop, 1 change of clothes. I told myself I'd do the rest later, maybe after grabbing lunch in town. I wanted to start fresh, walk around, meet a few people. Maybe shake off the weirdness. I drove back into Mercer Hollow around noon, expecting the lunch rush. There wasn't one. The diner was half full, the booths occupied by men in worn jackets and work boots, their arms tanned from field labor. Every head turned when I walked in. Nobody said a word. Just silence, thick and immediate, like I'd interrupted something. I sat on a stool at the counter. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with a bright red apron, came over with a menu but didn't smile. Her eyes kept darting to the window behind me. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yes, please." She poured it quickly, then stepped away as if standing near me made her nervous. A man 2 seats down shifted in his chair, boots scraping loud against the tile. He stared straight ahead as he spoke, as if addressing the room instead of me. "You're new." "Not a question. Just moved in," I said, trying to stay casual. "North Farmhouse." He didn't look at me, not even a glance. Should have asked around before renting that. I felt my stomach tighten. "Why is that?" His jaw moved like he was chewing on something unpleasant. "People don't stay long out there." That was it. No explanation. The waitress returned with my plate, grilled cheese and fries, but instead of setting it down normally, she slid it across the counter like the 2 feet of distance mattered. Then she leaned a little closer, voice low. "You heading home before dark?" I blinked. "Is there a reason I shouldn't?" She didn't answer directly, just whispered, "Be careful who you trust here." That was when the man finally turned his head toward me. His gaze was steady, unblinking. Especially today. I felt the hair rise on my arms. It was barely 1 p.m., but the air outside already looked different through the window, dimmer somehow, as if the sun were filtering through something thicker than clouds. A strange hush settled over the diner, and I suddenly felt like staying any longer was a bad idea. I threw money on the counter, didn't wait for change, and stepped out into the street, where the silence felt heavier than inside. The stroller woman from earlier stood on the sidewalk across from me. No baby this time. Just the empty stroller. She stared at me again, then pushed it quickly around the corner, disappearing without a word. For the first time that day, I felt something close to fear. Not because anyone had threatened me, not because anything clearly bad had happened, but because the entire town seemed to be waiting for something, and that something seemed to involve me. By the time I reached my truck, I already knew I wasn't imagining it anymore. The people here were afraid of something, and for some reason, they thought I should be too. I sat in my truck longer than I meant to, gripping the steering wheel while the engine idled, the air feeling strangely thick despite the cool afternoon. The street was nearly empty now. The few people walking by kept their heads down, moving briskly as if trying to get chores done before a storm rolled in. It wasn't stormy, just dim, like someone had quietly turned down the brightness knob on the world. I should have gone straight back to the house. Lock the door, breathe, reevaluate. But a stubborn part of me refused to be pushed around by a feeling I couldn't explain. I'd spent the last few years dealing with the 1,000 micro-anxieties of city life. Late rent, crowded trains, apartment walls thin enough to hear every argument next door. I didn't want my first day in Mercer Hollow to unravel me. So I decided to walk. Not far. Just up the block and back, to convince myself I wasn't overreacting. The walk didn't help. Every house I passed had curtains drawn, even the ones with lights on inside. A pickup truck rumbled by, moving slow as a hearse. The driver didn't look at me, but I could see the tightness in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the wheel like he was bracing for something. A dog barked once from behind a fence, sharp and frantic, then fell silent abruptly, as if commanded. Halfway down the street, a figure stepped out of a small grocery store. A teenager, maybe 17, skinny, wearing a faded hoodie. He froze when he saw me. Not startled, almost resentful. Like my presence inconvenienced him personally. Before I could say anything, he spoke in a low, fast tone. "You picked the wrong day to show up." I let out a shaky laugh. That's the second time someone said something like that today. What's going on? Some town event. He looked past me, scanning the street, then back at me, his shoulders visibly tense. "It's not a joke. Go home. Lock your doors. Don't open them for anyone, no matter what you hear." That last line made something cold slide through me. What'd I hear? He didn't answer, just walked off quickly, hood up, hands jammed in his pockets, feet moving like he was trying not to run. I stood there alone, the quiet settling thick as fog. That was it. I was done gathering clues like some clueless protagonist wandering into danger. I headed back to my truck and drove out of town, the tires crunching over gravel as I turned toward the farmhouse. The sky seemed even dimmer now, the horizon tinted with a grayish cast like dusk arriving hours too early. When I pulled into the driveway, something made my pulse jump. The front door, the one I'd locked before going out, was open again. Just a couple inches, but enough for the dark interior to spill into a thin line across the porch floor. I killed the engine and sat perfectly still, the only sound the ticking of the cooling engine. I watched the door, waited for movement. Nothing. No one stepped out. No shape shifted inside. This time, fear came sharper. I grabbed the tire iron from under my seat, not the bravest move, but the only weapon I had, and approached the porch quietly. The boards creaked under my feet. I pushed the door open with the iron, braced for someone to rush me. No one did. The house was silent, still, dust floating in thin threads of gray light. I stepped inside and checked the rooms again, faster this time. Kitchen untouched. Study empty. Living room exactly as it had been that morning. Upstairs, bedroom neat. Bathroom normal. No signs of intrusion. No footprints. Nothing missing. But the door had been locked. I checked it twice before leaving, and now the air inside felt wrong. Like someone else's breath had recently been in the room with mine. I locked the door again, deadbolt, latch, both, and dragged a small shelf in front of it for good measure. I wasn't going back out there until I figured this out. The unease didn't fade. If anything, it thickened, rising in my chest with a pressure that made it hard to stay still. I opened a window to let in air, but the breeze that drifted in felt strangely warm, like exhalation instead of wind. And somewhere in the distance, though I couldn't pinpoint the direction, I heard something faint. Not a scream. Not machinery. Just a low humming. Soft, steady, almost like a group of voices murmuring in unison. I stepped back from the window instinctively. The sound faded. I checked my phone, no signal. Not even a flicker. It had worked fine earlier in town. Out here, nothing. I tried Wi-Fi. The router in the house was old, blinking orange, refusing to connect. I sat at the small wooden table in the kitchen, staring at my hands. The skin across my knuckles felt tight, cold. I didn't want to admit how quickly the fear was taking hold, but the quiet in the house wasn't a comforting kind. It felt like listening to someone whisper just out of earshot. By 3:30, the sky had darkened enough that the interior of the house dimmed into long shadows. I turned on the lights. They flickered once before stabilizing. Every bulb buzzed faintly, not enough to be loud, just enough to make the silence feel crowded. I made myself wander room to prove I wasn't trapped by my own nerves. That's when I noticed something I'd missed earlier. On the wall near the staircase, faint but noticeable if you looked closely enough, was a smudge. Like someone had pressed their hand there. Not dirt, more like an oily residue, the shape of a palm and fingers. It hadn't been there when I toured the place last week. I was certain of that. I wiped it with a damp cloth. It smeared, then faded. I stood there staring at the wall far longer than necessary, heart hammering loud enough that the silence around me felt like it was leaning in to listen. Then my phone buzzed. I jolted, almost dropping it. One new text. Unknown number. I opened it slowly. Get inside before 5. Don't look out the windows after dark. Not even once. I stared at the message until the letters blurred. My first thought was the teenager. He'd seemed nervous enough. Maybe he'd gotten my number from someone in town. Maybe this was some tradition here, some bizarre local superstition or initiation prank. My second thought was worse. Someone had opened the door twice today. Someone who might have been inside this house long enough to see my number written on a box or a document. Someone who didn't want me looking out my own windows after sunset. I checked the locks again. All of them. Every window latch. Every door hinge. Even the basement door, which creaked loudly when I tugged at it but stayed firmly shut. By 4:30, the world outside looked like late evening instead of late afternoon. The sky had gone a strange muted purple-gray, thick enough that the treeline looked like a smear of ink rather than individual branches. I didn't know what would happen at 5. But every person in town had made it clear. Whatever it was, I wasn't supposed to be outside when it started. I stood in the middle of the living room, the fading light turning the floorboards dull and shadowed, and wondered what in this quiet little town could possibly justify this level of fear. At 4:47 p.m., something tapped against the window. Then again. So deliberate. I froze, and the house held its breath with me. The second tap against the glass felt more intentional than the first, like whoever, or whatever, was outside wanted me to know they were there. I didn't move. The air around me seemed to stretch, pulling tight across my skin, every instinct screaming at me not to look. The warning in the text echoed in my skull. Don't look out the windows after dark. Not even once. It wasn't dark yet, technically, not fully. But the sky had darkened far more than it should have by that hour. And the atmosphere in the house felt like the transition between day and night had already begun in some invisible way. Another tap. Almost polite. I stepped backward slowly until my shoulder touched the kitchen doorway. The house creaked faintly under its own weight, as if shifting on old beams. The sound of the tapping didn't continue. Only silence followed, deep and complete, the kind of silence that feels like an ear pressed against a wall, listening. I counted my breaths. 6, 7. Nothing else happened. I forced myself to inhale deeply, then edged toward the hallway to put distance between myself and the window without making any noise that might draw attention. If the townspeople were terrified of something coming out after dark, I wasn't going to be the idiot who went toward it. My phone buzzed again. I nearly dropped it. Another text from the same unknown number. Don't answer the door. No matter who it sounds like. My blood went cold. There was no explanation in the message, no follow-up, no reassurance. Just those 2 lines. I wanted to text back, ask who they were, why they were warning me, what the hell was happening today that everyone seemed terrified to say out loud. My fingers hovered above the screen. Then another message appeared before I could type. It's already starting. A soft creaking sound floated through the house at that moment. I whipped my head toward the staircase, heart pounding. The sound had come from upstairs, like a floorboard shifting under weight. But I'd been alone in the house since noon. I hadn't heard anyone come in. I'd locked every door. The creaking came again. Slow, then stopped. The shadows on the staircase looked deeper than they should have been. I found myself whispering out loud before I realized it. No. No, there's nobody up there. There's nobody. My voice sounded too soft, like the house swallowed it. I backed toward the living room, trying to keep the stairs in sight. Every instinct told me not to go up there. Not to investigate. Not tonight. But I needed some kind of explanation, anything more than the half-formed dread pulsing in my chest. Another text came through. Don't go upstairs. I froze mid-step. The timing was too perfect. Either the person texting me knew the house extremely well, or they could see inside. Neither possibility made me feel safer. I typed a single word. 3 dots pulsed. Then stopped. Then pulsed again. After 10 seconds, a reply. Someone who wants you alive. A chill crept down my spine like cold water. Before I could respond, the house shifted again. A subtle sound, but heavy enough to suggest movement. A slow thud, like something settling its weight on an old wooden floor. My pulse hammered so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I glanced at the windows instinctively, then immediately jerked my gaze away, terrified that even a glimpse through the darkening glass might count as looking outside. I couldn't tell how much light remained, but with every passing minute the interior seemed to dim. Then, footsteps. Not upstairs this time. On the porch. So slow, deliberate. My mouth went dry. The footsteps stopped in front of the door. A beat of silence. A knock. 3 gentle taps. I didn't breathe. Not for fear of being heard, but because my entire body had forgotten the mechanics of drawing air. The knock came again, slightly louder. My phone buzzed. Don't answer it. Don't speak. My throat tightened. The knocking shifted into something worse. A familiar voice. A man's voice. Too calm. Hey, is someone home? My truck broke down. Could I use your phone? Everything inside me recoiled. I knew that voice. Or rather, I recognized it. It sounded exactly like the man from the diner. Same tone. Same cadence. but something in it was off, like hearing a recording played through a speaker that didn't match the voice's warmth. Another knock. Louder this time. "Hello? You left your door unlocked earlier. Just checking on you." I felt every hair stand on end. I had locked the door earlier, twice, and I hadn't told anyone I found it unlocked that morning. The house seemed to hold its breath with me. Footsteps shifted on the wooden planks outside. Then the doorknob rattled lightly, just once, testing. The man's voice came again, closer, as if he leaned against the door. "You shouldn't be alone tonight." Every muscle in my body went rigid. The voice did something strange mid-sentence, like it hit a glitch, a tiny stutter, barely perceptible but wrong enough to twist my stomach. It sounded like two layers of sound sliding over each other. I pressed my back to the wall, gripping the tire iron so tightly my hand hurt. The voice spoke again, and this time I heard something that shattered any illusion that this was the diner man at my door. A second voice, identical to the first, overlapped it for a split second. Almost a perfect echo, but out of sync. Half a syllable behind. "Let me in." My chest seized. "No," I whispered before I could stop myself. The moment the word left my lips, the porch fell silent. Too silent. My phone vibrated violently in my hand, 3 messages in rapid succession. "Stop talking. Get away from the door." No. I scrambled backward as something thudded softly against the outside of the house, like a palm pressed flat against the siding. The windows darkened slightly, as if something large was blocking the stray light from outside. My breath came shallow and fast. Then quiet. No voice. No footsteps. No movement. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered for a moment if I'd imagined everything. If the fear had made the sounds bigger than they really were. And then, soft, deliberate footfalls on the porch moved away from the front door. Slowly, calmly, as if whatever had been standing there decided it had all the time in the world. The steps descended the porch stairs, but they didn't fade into the distance. They stopped directly beneath the living room window, and something dragged lightly across the outside wall, moving vertically, like fingers trailing upward. Higher, 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 until the sound reached the height of the window frame, and then everything went dead silent. I stood frozen in the center of the room, the dim light flickering, my pulse loud enough to drown out the world. The next text came through without warning. "It knows you saw it. Don't move." I didn't dare breathe. The house felt like it had shrunk around me, every wall pressing inward, the air thinning as if something outside was pulling it through the cracks. The faint flicker of the kitchen light threw uneasy shadows along the floorboards, stretching and shrinking with every pulse of electricity. Somewhere beneath the window, the quiet presence waited. Not moving, not leaving, just waiting. My phone stayed still for a long minute. Too long. I didn't know whether to hope for another message or dread it. "Don't make a sound. It's listening." I gripped the tire iron so tightly the metal dug into my palm. Sweat slid down the back of my neck. A single floorboard creaked beneath my foot as I shifted my weight, barely an inch, and the instant sound that followed outside made me stop breathing altogether. Something pressed gently, almost curiously, against the window pane. Not a tap. Not a knock. More like a slow push, testing the resistance. The glass groaned faintly, not cracking but strained. I stared at the floor, refusing to look up at the window, forcing my eyes away even though every instinct screamed to know what was on the other side. The pressure stopped. Silence washed over the room like a held breath. Then something scraped across the exterior wall, inching downward. No rhythm, no pattern, just a long, gliding stroke that made my skin crawl. The sound drifted toward the side of the house, then faded entirely. I listened hard for footsteps. None came. No retreating weight, no creak of boards, no crunch of gravel. Nothing. As if it had simply lifted away from the world. My phone vibrated again, a single short buzz that made me flinch. "Don't look for it. It doesn't walk when it moves." My hands shook so badly the screen blurred. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to release a breath through my nose, quietly, like I was trying not to fog glass. "Okay," I mouthed without voice. Time dragged. Minutes passed, though I couldn't say how many. The dimness in the house deepened, shifting toward true evening even though my phone said it was only 5:26 p.m. Whatever was happening outside, the world seemed to be falling into night faster than it should. The buzzing hum I'd heard earlier, faint, distant, like murmured voices, returned. This time closer. Not outside the window. Not upstairs. Somewhere in the walls. The vibration pulsed through the floorboards, the faintest tremor, enough that I felt it rather than heard it. A strange resonance that made me cover my ears, though that didn't help. My phone lit up again. Go to the hallway. Stay away from exterior walls. I moved as silently as I could, each step deliberate, feeling the vibration fade slightly as I reached the narrow hallway between the kitchen and the stairs. I pressed myself against the inner wall and slid down to a crouch. It wasn't ideal, but it was the farthest point from any window. The house seemed to settle again, the hum softening into a low throb that felt like a deep exhale beneath my feet. I didn't like thinking of the house's breathing, but right now, everything felt alive in the worst way. Time crawled forward. 5:41 p.m. 5:48. 5:53. Every minute felt like an hour. My phone screen dimmed, threatening to go dark, and I tapped it quietly to keep it from locking. The battery was dropping faster than normal, draining like the air in the house. Then, from the front porch, the creaking returned. Slow, measured, too heavy for a person walking lightly, too light for boots. The footsteps weren't footsteps. The weight was uneven, suggesting something shifting its mass in ways that didn't align with legs or a stride. The boards complained under it. Not a rhythm, but intermittent pressure, like it was exploring where to place its weight next. Then the voice returned. But this time, it wasn't trying to sound like the man from the diner. It was trying to sound like me. Hey, Alex? It's okay, it said. My name. My own voice wrapped around it like skin pulled too tight. Let me in. You're safe with me. It wasn't perfect. The cadence was slightly off, like listening to yourself speak through a mouth that didn't understand breath or pause. A synthetic mimicry wrapped in something organic and wrong. I clamped a hand over my mouth. It continued in a soft, coaxing tone that made my stomach twist into knots. Alex, come to the door. My phone buzzed violently in my hand. Don't react. It knows your voice now. I squeezed my eyes shut, leaning my head back against the wall. I didn't dare whisper. Didn't dare move. The mimicry faltered slightly on the last word it spoke. Come to home. A wrong phrase. A misplaced idea. It said, home, with a curious rise in pitch, like it was testing what the word meant. The porch boards creaked again. Something slid down the length of the door. Maybe a hand, maybe something that only moved like one. A faint tapping followed. Not directed at me. Just experimental. Then everything fell silent once more. Minutes passed. The hum subsided. The air grew still, suffocatingly still, like the house had been emptied of noise or breath. When I finally dared move, inching slightly to look toward the living room, my muscles aching from tension, I expected to hear some residual sign that the presence was still near. Instead, something worse greeted me. The front door, the one I'd locked twice and pushed furniture in front of, rested half an inch open. Not wide. Just enough to show it had been nudged from the outside. My phone buzzed. This time the message didn't feel like a warning. It felt like the truth I hadn't wanted. It got in. Get to the basement. No, my stomach dropped. The basement door was at the far end of the kitchen, at least 20 feet from where I crouched. And if the door had been opened even slightly, that meant whatever had been outside was now inside the house. Somewhere behind me. Somewhere in the shadows. I didn't allow myself to think. I pushed off the wall and moved silently but fast, keeping low, trying not to let the floorboards complain under my steps. The kitchen lights flickered again just as I reached the basement door. Behind me, from somewhere near the living room, a soft, low sound rolled through the house. A breath. Not mine. Not human. I jerked the basement door open and slipped inside, shutting it carefully behind me, not daring to slam it. Total darkness swallowed me. I felt blindly for the light switch, found it, flicked it on. Nothing. The electricity in the basement was dead. and in the suffocating dark, behind the thin wooden door, something began to move across the floor with a slow, deliberate drag, inching closer to where I stood. In the darkness of the basement stairwell, the air felt heavy enough to chew. My fingers hovered over the dead light switch, useless, my pulse hammering loud enough that I worried whatever was outside the door could hear it. The dragging sound from the kitchen grew louder, not in volume but in presence, like something was taking its time understanding the shape of the room above me through movement alone. I backed down one step, then another. Each creak sounded deafening to me, though maybe it was just fear magnifying everything. My hand slid along the wall until it touched rough plaster, cold, colder than the rest of the house, like the temperature dropped with each step into the basement. The dragging paused. Silence filled the kitchen. A soft tap against the basement door. Not knocking. Something like a fingertip. Testing. Learning. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I froze, praying the sound wasn't audible outside the door. I pulled it out slowly, shielding the screen with my hand so the glow wouldn't spill into the crack around the frame. A new text. Don't stop. Get all the way down. Quietly. I started moving again, one step at a time, keeping each footfall controlled, touching only the very edges of the steps to avoid the loudest creaks. The sound on the other side resumed, a light, deliberate sweep across the floorboards, as if whatever was out there was circling, reorienting itself. Halfway down, my shoulder brushed against a hanging chain. The faint metallic clink it made echoed like a gunshot. The movement outside the basement door stopped immediately. My blood froze. A long moment passed. Too long. Then, without warning, a slow press pushed against the door from the other side. Not enough to open it fully, just enough to test the give. A tiny breath of cool air slipped through the crack, carrying a faint scent I didn't recognize. Not decay. Not dirt. Something metallic, like cold iron mixed with ozone. I eased another step downward, keeping low. The basement itself was nearly pitch black, save for the faintest sliver of twilight leaking in from the narrow ground-level windows near the ceiling. Shadows layered everything, making the room look deeper than it was. The basement door creaked softly, as if something leaned its weight against it from outside. My phone buzzed again. When you reach the bottom, keep to the right. Stay away from the stairs. I reached the concrete floor as quietly as I could, crouching behind an old wooden workbench. The air down here was colder, stale with dust and age. Paint cans, toolboxes, and rusted shelves crowded the space, creating a maze of shapes I tried not to bump into. The dragging on the floor above resumed. Slow, sweeping, like a limb moving in arcs. Then I heard something worse. A faint exhale, too steady, too controlled. As if something was imitating breathing rather than naturally doing it. The floorboards above me flexed slightly, just enough that dust fell from the ceiling beams. The thing was walking in irregular patterns. No stride, no rhythm. More like it was studying the house, memorizing the layout. Or hunting. I didn't know which thought terrified me more. I crouched behind the bench, muscles coiled tight, trying to make myself small. My phone buzzed again in my hand. I can't see well in the dark, but it hears perfectly. I covered my mouth with the sleeve of my shirt to muffle my breathing. A second message followed almost instantly. If it opens the door, don't run. Running makes noise. My heart slammed against my ribs. My palms were slick, my grip on the phone unsteady. The thought of staying still while something opened the door and came down the stairs felt impossible, but I trusted whoever was texting me more than I trusted anything my instincts screamed. A soft, long scrape traveled down the basement door. Not a knock. Not a push. Just contact. Feeling. Testing. As if something with too many joints was trying to understand the texture. The handle shifted a fraction of an inch. Then again. Then, with a click so soft I almost missed it, the latch moved. My stomach dropped. The door eased open half an inch. Then an inch. A faint strip of lamplight from the kitchen spilled onto the basement stairwell, carving a thin path downward. I held my breath until spots danced in my vision. Something shifted at the top of the stairs. A silhouette blocked part of the light. Not fully, just enough to distort the shape of the doorway. A shape too tall. Too narrow. like someone stretched vertically from head to toe. The figure didn't descend. Instead, it leaned. Its weight pressed against the top step, causing it to creak. Something brushed lightly against the door frame. Flesh or fabric, I couldn't tell. The angle of its body was wrong, tilted too far forward, as if it were bending at a hinge that shouldn't exist. A whisper, not a voice, but a faint shifting of air, slid down the staircase. Then I heard my own name again. But this time, it wasn't mimicking my voice or the diner man. It sounded like someone else. A woman. Someone older. Someone calm. Alexander? The voice was soft, warm, comforting. Familiar in a way I couldn't place. Like a memory half remembered from childhood. It hit something deep inside my chest, something instinctual, and for a split second, I almost answered. My phone buzzed. That isn't a person, no matter what voice it uses. Another message came through immediately. It will try a few. Ignore them all. A different voice drifted down the stairs, this time a man's, shaky, breathy, like someone in distress. Help me, it hurts, please. The words cracked on the last syllable. My body pulled forward on instinct alone, panic rising. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stop myself from whispering back. The figure's silhouette shifted slightly with each sound it made, as if reshaping itself in response. The basement floor beneath me vibrated faintly. The hum was back, but now it was coming from inside the house. The figure at the top of the stairs began to descend. One step, a second. Slow, deliberate, each footfall bending the wood like it weighed far more than its thin shape suggested. My phone buzzed again. Gone all the way to the back wall. There's a vent. Get inside. I scanned the shadows behind me. My eyes adjusted enough to make out the vague outline of a large metal grate near the far end of the basement, low to the ground, wide enough for a person if they squeezed. The figure took another step. I didn't think. I crawled silently, keeping my body low, weaving around old paint cans and boxes, heart racing so hard I felt it in my teeth. The floorboard above groaned with each movement of the thing on the stairs. As I reached the vent, I heard the figure reach the halfway point of the staircase. The air thickened. The hum deepened. Something in the house seemed to lean inward toward the staircase. I grabbed the vent grate and pulled. It didn't budge. The figure took another step. Then another. Closer, closer. I pulled again, harder, metal shrieking softly. Too loud. The figure froze. Its head, or whatever passed for a head, tilted toward the sound with a slow, unnatural precision. My phone buzzed one last time. Don't freeze. Open it. No. I braced a foot on the wall, pulled with everything I had, and the grate tore free with a sharp metallic crack. The figure moved. The metal of the vent vibrated against my chest with every shallow breath. The thing outside didn't press hard, just that gentle, testing weight from those 3 fingertips, like it was feeling the texture of the grate, studying the shape of me through the metal. The air smelled of rust and cold earth, thick with dust that coated my tongue. I couldn't wipe my nose or shift my weight without scraping the walls of the vent. Another fingertip touched down. For now. Light, deliberate points of pressure. It was counting the edges. My muscles trembled, but I forced them still, every tendon locked tight. The vent was narrow enough that even the slightest movement sent a metallic groan down the length of the tunnel. I prayed it didn't hear the blood pounding inside my skull. The fingertips slid downward, tracing the corner of the grate, feeling toward the screws I'd torn from the frame. The metal whined under their touch, a soft, inquisitive sound that made my breath hitch. I clamped a hand over my mouth, praying it didn't hear. My phone buzzed against my leg. The vibration jolted through my body like lightning. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, fighting the reflex to flinch. Slowly, painfully, I eased the phone up where I could read the screen in the faint glow bouncing down the vent walls. Don't move. It's trying to understand your shape. My lungs burned for a full breath, but I couldn't risk exhaling too loud. The fingertips retreated. For a second, I thought it had lost interest. But then something heavier pressed against the outside of the vent. An entire hand, maybe, or something that flattened itself to mimic one. The metal dented inward an inch, flexing dangerously close to my ribs. It didn't push hard. It pushed like someone feeling a fragile object, trying to gauge where the weak points were. Another vibration, lower, deeper, rolled through the house, traveling through the wall and into the metal tunnel. The thing outside responded by tilting its head. I couldn't see it, but I felt the subtle shift of pressure through the grate, like its entire weight leaned closer. The hum intensified briefly, then faded. A slow, heavy exhale washed against the metal. Silence. The hand withdrew. I didn't trust it, not for a second. Silence could be anything here. Silence was a weapon. I stayed pressed against the cold metal, counting quietly in my head. 10 seconds. 30. A full minute. Nothing. Just the occasional snap of the house settling above me. Then my phone buzzed again. I nearly crushed it with my grip. IT didn't leave. It's listening. Wait, I didn't know how whoever was texting me knew that. The idea terrified me all over again. But whatever their source of knowledge was, they hadn't been wrong yet. Another minute. Another. The dust in the vent made my eyes water, but I didn't dare blink too loud. My thighs burned from the awkward angle. My hands had gone numb. The next text came 10 minutes later. When you hear it go upstairs, move. Not before. My pulse spiked. How would I hear it go upstairs from inside a metal vent underground? I held my breath and listened, forcing stillness on everything. My heartbeat, my thoughts, the need to breathe too fast. Through the floorboards, faint vibrations shuddered. I couldn't tell what direction they came from, but they had a rhythm now. Not footsteps. More like something distributing weight unevenly across multiple points. A sharp, heavy sound from the upper floor. A floorboard groaning. Another. Faster this time. Ascending. Whatever it was climbing the stairs to the second level. The moment I recognized the pattern, my phone buzzed again. No. Go. I moved the way someone does after holding a live wire for too long, jerky at first, then controlled by sheer terror. I crawled deeper into the vent, pulling myself with my forearms as quietly as possible. The tunnel angled right after a few feet, then dropped slightly, the metal groaning under my weight. The house above creaked with shifting pressure. Whatever was up there moved across the second floor, slow but purposeful, as if searching room by room. The vent narrowed, forcing me onto my side. My shoulders scraped the wall, sending a soft metallic click echoing down the duct. I froze. My blood ran cold. The movement above stopped. A long silence stretched. A single, deliberate footfall on the upstairs floorboards. Slow. Listening. The phone vibrated with a short pulse. A message appeared. It heard that. Move faster. I swallowed a gasp and dragged myself farther into the vent. Dust billowed around my face, choking me. I stifled a cough behind my sleeve, lungs screaming for a normal breath. The tunnel bent slightly upward, leading toward a small inspection hatch tucked behind the water heater in the far corner of the basement. The hatch was barely visible, but I saw it. A faint outline of metal against the deeper shadow. Behind me, something scraped lightly against the metal vent wall. A soft, sliding sound. My blood iced over. It was following the vibration of my movement. Not directly crawling after me, pressing against the duct from outside, using the metal to trace where I was going. Another scrape. Closer. The metal bowed inward slightly, like a snout or hand, or something else, was pushing against it experimentally. I dragged myself forward with every ounce of strength, the tunnel tightening, squeezing, my clothes catching on screws that lined the edges. The inspection hatch came into reach, but it was bolted. One single bolt. Rusted. My shaking fingers twisted it, metal grinding loudly. The scraping outside the vent stopped. Another press. Harder. A dent formed behind my right foot. I twisted the bolt faster, fighting rust, fighting panic, the metal screaming softly as it turned. The bolt came free. I shoved the hatch open just enough to slip through, scraping my shoulders raw as I forced myself into the cramped cavity behind the heater. I pulled the hatch shut behind me just as the thing slammed gently, but unmistakably, against the vent panel I just crawled through. The metal shook. Dust rained over me. My phone buzzed. That was close. Don't make noise. It's trying to figure out where you went. The heater ticked softly as the metal cooled. The creature pressed again, slow, steady, against the vent wall a foot away from me. The metal crumpled inward slightly, a warped shadow bending the shape of the duct. I clutched my phone to my chest, holding my breath until my lungs screamed. Another message appeared. I won't stay down there long. When it leaves, you can't stay in the house. Not after it's seen you move. The pause. Wait for my signal. Then run. I stared at the screen, hands shaking violently. Run where? Into the dark? Into whatever the rest of the town was hiding from? But I didn't type the question, because outside the thin metal wall, the creature inhaled. Slow. Searching for me. The inhale was so close I felt it through the metal, a slow pull of air that made the duct wall flex inward as if the thing's breath carried weight. Dust sifted down the back of my neck. I pressed my spine into the cold concrete behind the heater, trying to melt into the shadows. My lungs begged for air, but I barely let myself sip a breath, tiny and silent, afraid even the shift of my ribs might be too loud. The creature exhaled again, long, controlled, like it was tasting the air for me. Every instinct screamed to run, but the text was clear. Wait. Wait for its signal. My phone vibrated softly against my chest. Not a message, just the tiniest alert that the battery was now at 6%. I wanted to throw up. Another inhale pulsed through the wall. Then a faint, wet sound, like something dragging over metal, followed by a slow, deliberate tap. The fingertip? A knuckle? Whatever it used made a dry clicking sound against the duct, as if it were testing different points for weakness. It tapped again, then again. 3 taps, then a pause, then 2. A pattern, not random, measured. My phone buzzed. I jerked, almost dropping it, shielding the light quickly with my hand. A new message appeared. It's learning you. Don't react. My chest tightened painfully. Learning me? The idea made my skin crawl. As if it wasn't just tracking movement, but figuring out my size, my rhythm, the density of my breath inside the walls. The tapping stopped. The air grew thick, silent. Then, footsteps. But not the slow, inquisitive movement I'd heard earlier. These were faster, purposeful, crossing the basement floor toward the stairs. I strained to hear if it was actually leaving, or if it was trying to trick me into thinking it was. The footsteps disappeared up the staircase, floorboards whining under its weight. Something in the house shifted, like pressure equalizing. Then the text came. Don't move. It's waiting on the stairs. I swallowed a cry. Of course it was. Like a predator testing prey. The creature was smart in a terrifying way, patient without understanding patience, dangerous without needing anger. Minutes crawled by. The bare concrete beneath me leached warmth from my skin until my legs numbed. A faint draft drifted through the tiny cavity, chilling my fingers. From the second floor came a sudden, sharp crash. Something heavy toppled. A loud, jarring thud that shook dust loose from the beams. My first instinct was to flinch, but I understood instantly it wasn't random. It was looking for me upstairs. My phone buzzed, 2 short pulses. This is your only chance. When you hear the front door open, run through the back. I stared at the message, hands trembling. Back door? The kitchen had one, I remembered, old, with a warped frame. I hadn't checked the lock on that one. I didn't even know if it worked. The creature moved above me in heavy, directionless steps, as if throwing its weight around in confusion. Furniture scraped. Something slammed into a wall hard enough to rattle the pipes. Then, silence. My pulse hammered. The front door slowly creaked open. A long groan of wood and rusted hinges. Not loud, just deliberate. Exactly what the message predicted. My phone buzzed again, one simple word. Go. I didn't think. I pushed the vent hatch open silently, sliding out into the open basement. My legs nearly collapsed from being cramped so long, but adrenaline shoved them forward. I moved crouched low, keeping close to the wall, breathing through my teeth to minimize sound. The house above was quiet in the most terrifying way, like the entire building was holding its breath, listening. I slipped barefoot across the cold cement, edging toward the stairs. Each one I climbed felt like walking on taut wire. When I reached the kitchen doorway, I paused, peering into the dim room. The kitchen lights flickered weakly. The front of the house was silent. The back door stood in shadow. I moved toward it slowly, stepping around the places where the old boards were most likely to creak. My fingers brushed the deadbolt, unlocked. I pushed the door open quietly, inch by inch. Cool night air spilled in, carrying the smell of damp earth and distant fields. My first breath of it felt like life after suffocation. I stepped outside, letting the door rest gently behind me, not daring to close it loud enough to echo. The backyard was an expanse of darkness stretching toward the tree line. The moon hadn't risen yet, only the faint glow of the dying day lit the horizon. The earth felt cold under my feet, soft from the recent rain. I moved along the side of the house, keeping low. My only goal was distance. Distance and silence. My phone buzzed again. I ducked behind a rusted rain barrel, shielding the light before checking. Don't go toward town. Head for the fields. Stay low. No lights. I looked toward the distant silhouette of town. Every window I could see was dark. No street lamps. No movement. It looked abandoned, except I knew it wasn't. Everyone there was hiding. From this, I turned toward the fields. Tall grass swayed gently in the wind, a soft shivering ripple stretching out toward the dark horizon. If anything moved through it, I'd hear it, and it would hear me. My phone buzzed a second time. It knows you left. Move faster. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted into the field, pushing through the tall grass as quietly as I could, arms shielding my face, feet slipping on uneven dirt. The grass parted with soft rustles. The sky above deepened into a starless black. Halfway across the field, I risked a glance back. The house stood small and pale against the darkness. Then something stepped out onto the back porch. A silhouette. Narrow. Wrong. It tilted its head. Not at the ground. At me. Even across the field, I felt its attention like a physical weight pressing into my spine. My phone buzzed frantically. Don't look at it. Get down. No. I dropped into the grass so fast I scraped both knees open. The blade swallowed me, prickling against my skin, the earth cold and damp beneath me. The silhouette at the house didn't move, but the grass around me did. Not from wind, from vibration. Something was crossing the field, closing the distance in long, uneven bursts, like weight shifting across too many limbs. I flattened myself fully, face against the cold soil. The phone buzzed once more, barely visible in the grass. It's near you. Stay flat. Don't move. No matter what you hear. The grass parted 3 feet to my left, then 2. Right beside my ear. A slow inhale. What? Searching. I squeezed my eyes shut as the blade tips brushed against my cheek, moving in small arcs, mapping the shape of my face in the dark. The creature exhaled a trembling breath across the back of my neck. My body screamed to run, but I didn't move. I didn't even blink. The phone buzzed once more, so soft I almost missed it. It's choosing. Don't let it choose you. The creature lingered behind me with a patience that made every instinct in my body riot. Its breath warmed the back of my neck, impossibly slow and measured, like it was memorizing the pattern of my skin through the dark. The field around us went death still. No wind, no crickets, no night sounds at all, like the world had retreated to leave the two of us alone in the dark. A single grass blade brushed along my cheek as the thing shifted its weight. It wasn't clumsy. It wasn't frantic. It was precise. It moved with the awful certainty of something that knew it was the only predator out here. My phone vibrated against my hip, just once, the tiniest buzz, like it was afraid of being heard. I didn't dare look at it, but I could feel the message notification burning through my pocket like a tiny flare I couldn't afford to witness. The creature inhaled again, closer, almost touching my ear now. The sound was wrong. What? Layered. Like 2 breaths happening at once. I fought the instinct to recoil. Any movement, any twitch, would be suicide. The grass to my right shifted a fraction. Something long pressed gently against my shoulder through the blades. Not a hand. Not quite a limb. Too smooth. Too flexible. Like muscle and skin without bones. It slid a few inches down my arm. Slow enough to be intentional. Testing the shape of me. Mapping it. A faint tremor went through the ground, subtle as a heartbeat. Not from the creature. This was different. A distant vibration, steady and slow. The creature froze. Its breath stopped mid-inhale. For the first time since I'd felt it approach, the thing hesitated. It lifted its weight off my shoulder with a careful, smooth withdrawal, then tilted its head. At least that's what the shifting pressure in the grass suggested. The blades around me trembled slightly as it repositioned itself. Listening. The distant vibration grew stronger, still faint, but recognizable now. A vehicle. Someone was driving down the dirt road toward the edge of the fields. The creature exhaled sharply, an irritated, guttural sound, like a predator interrupted. Then the grass exploded beside me. It moved faster than sound. One violent burst of motion that flattened the blades around us. A rush of displaced air slammed against my body as it launched itself away, streaking through the field in the direction of the house, long limbs slicing through the grass with unnatural precision. In seconds, it was gone. The world filled with silence again, except for the distant rumble of the approaching engine. I didn't move. Not until my phone buzzed again, insistently this time. I fumbled it out with trembling hands. One message. Run to the road. Lights off. Keep low. I pushed myself up, legs barely obeying, and sprint crawled through the grass, every nerve raw. My knees buckled twice, but adrenaline shoved me forward. The field sloped upward slightly toward the dirt road that cut behind the property lines. I kept my head down, hands brushing through the grass to guide myself. The rumble of the engine grew louder. Then headlights broke over the rise. A dark pickup truck crawled along the dirt road, moving slowly, deliberately, like the driver was searching for something, someone. I waved both arms wildly, not even sure if they could see me through the tall grass. The truck slowed. Stopped. A door swung open. A voice hissed urgently, "Hart. Here, get over here now." I didn't recognize the voice, but it was human, tired, strained, but human. I crashed through the last stretch of grass, stumbled onto the packed dirt of the road, and half collapsed into the open passenger door. A woman reached out, grabbed the back of my shirt, and yanked me inside with surprising strength. She slammed the door shut. "Down," she ordered. "Floor." I dropped instantly, curling onto the truck's rubber mat as she threw the vehicle into reverse, spinning gravel in a tight arc before tearing down the road with her headlights off. My breathing hitched into gasps. The woman in the driver's seat darted frantic looks into the mirrors. She was in her late 40s, hair tied back in a messy braid, face pale and tight with fear. "You moved," she said through clenched teeth. "You weren't supposed to move. But you're still alive. That's the important part." "Who are you?" I choked out. She didn't answer. My phone buzzed again. I pulled it out. Another message from the same unknown number. "You're with her. Good. Don't let her stop driving." I lifted my head slightly. "Did you send these?" The woman kept her eyes on the road. "Not me. But listen to them. Whoever's texting you saved your life." The truck bounced violently over a pothole. I gripped the seat to steady myself. "What was that thing?" She let out a hollow, humorless breath. "You don't want the full answer. Not tonight." "That doesn't." "Quiet," she snapped. My phone buzzed again. I read the new message. "Don't go back to the town. Not tonight. Not ever." I swallowed hard. The town, everyone knew. They were scared. Why didn't anyone just tell me what was out there? The woman's hands tightened on the wheel until her knuckles blanched. "They can't," she said softly. "It hears spoken warnings. Anything spoken with intention. Even whispers." My stomach twisted. "Hears? From how far?" "All of Mercer Hollow." My breath caught. "Then how are we?" "Talking while we're moving gives us a little protection," she said quickly. "Only a little. So shut up unless I ask." I shut my mouth. We drove for almost 10 minutes down winding country back roads. The world grew darker, deeper, the night sky still starless, like the heavens themselves had closed their eyes. Then my phone vibrated again. Stop the truck. Engine off. Lights off. No, the woman didn't hesitate. She killed the engine and coasted to the shoulder of the road, pulling us into the shadow of a low ditch. Out, she whispered. We slipped into the ditch, crouching low. Grass brushed my face again, and my whole body flinched. She pressed a hand to my shoulder to steady me. Far in the distance, too far to be sound but close enough to feel, something shrieked through the fields. Not a scream. Not animal. Something stretched thin over shapes and meanings I didn't understand. The woman inhaled sharply. It's searching, she whispered. My phone lit up again. Don't let it find you. Stay with her. Keep moving when I tell you. The second message followed instantly. And don't come back for your belongings. Ever. The house isn't yours anymore. My breath hitched. The weight of it sunk deep. What happens now? I whispered. She didn't answer immediately. She just looked at me with a pity that made my stomach drop. Then, now we get you out of Mercer Hollow before it decides to follow. My phone buzzed one last time. If you survive tonight, leave everything behind. Don't look back. The woman grabbed my arm. Run, she whispered. So I did. Into the dark. Into the unknown. Into whatever future existed outside that town. And behind us, somewhere in the miles of empty fields, something screamed again. Something that now knew my shape. Something that now knew my breath. Something that would remember me.